So good morning to everyone. I'm just going to do introductions as we just give it a few more minutes for people to dial in. But I'm delighted to see so many of you, and also particularly delighted to see Helen, who is a great friend and editor of CorpComms Magazine. So Helen Dunne, welcome, and welcome to this Vuelio webinar. So this is a partnership between Vuelio and CorpComms Magazine. My name is Natalie Orringe. I'm CMO at Vuelio, but in a previous life was a PR and comms professional for 18 years. So I know Helen very well, I know the industry very well, and that's why we're so delighted to have partnered with CorpComms Magazine to launch CovidComms. So really the purpose of today's webinar is to just give you a bit more of a context as to why Helen came up with this brilliant idea, to talk a bit about what we're hoping to achieve with the CovidComms Awards, and then to come on to the really important thing, how can you enter, and what are some of the key categories. So Helen, to kick us off, why don't you give us a bit of an introduction to CovidComms and how you came up with the idea?
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, I mean, I came up with the idea right at the beginning when we were sort of threatening about lockdown, because as you know, we have a long-standing awards program with Comms Awards, which I think is probably 15 years now it's been going. And it's really popular. But you know, and we were just about to announce, we normally open it up for entries in April, and it just felt at that time that it was the wrong thing to do. It felt out of kilter with what was going on. You know, you look at the categories and they just felt that they jarred, you know, asking people to talk about their annual reports when they were sort of in the middle of a crisis, just things like that just didn't seem right. And at the same time, I couldn't quite see then, and I still can't see now, how you could do an event in November for hundreds of people, and whether there'd be any appetite for it. And so I kind of thought then that actually what people were doing at the time was they were doing extraordinary things, and all our categories were wrong. So therefore we had to create an awards event that reflected the reality of today. And so the CovidComms, I started talking about the idea with comms people, and they were saying they really liked it. And they said there was a few things that had to be. It had to be really easy to enter, not like asking thousands of words on an entry form. And it had to reflect what they were doing. So I came up and I sort of talked around about what the categories were. And so then the idea then came to do a completely different awards event, just a one-off, the CovidComms Awards, which would be a one-off celebration of brilliant communications through the pandemic, because companies were starting to do extraordinary things. And so, you know, all the categories are sort of reflecting the challenges that we felt that I felt, and in talking to people, the industry was facing at the time.
And maybe just to bring that to life a bit, I mean, I'm sort of conscious that you've worked in the industry, you've spoken to a lot of industry leaders for a good long period of time. Why do you think COVID did prompt such a radical sort of different response? And I guess, are there some examples that jump to mind when you think about how companies reacted?
Well, I think, you know, immediately, really interestingly, companies for years and years and years have said that our people come first. And I think this is one example of a crisis where the people really did come first. So you saw immediately companies were dialing down the external communications and really just focusing on what they could do for their people, and sort of trying to organize reassurance for them and stuff. You know, you had, for the first time ever, everyone was in the same boat, the same crisis. Everyone was either working from home or they were an essential worker, so working in a factory or working in a retailer or in the NHS or whatever. You know, so companies then they really dialed up their communication, and they really sort of, a lot of their corporate responsibility programs which they had in place came into action, where it was about community engagement. It was about looking after other people in the environment, in their locality. And so you started to see that really early on, and you started to see leaders talking to their staff like never before. You know, my LinkedIn was filled with sort of people saying, oh my goodness, I've just seen my chief exec in his kitchen. And that was, all of that was odd. You know, it was really different. And it was achieved at such speed in extraordinary circumstances where companies didn't have their normal structures around them. Everyone was working remotely. Everyone's teams was sort of disparate in disparate places. And And I think that's sort of, when I started to see that, that's when I thought there's something here that we need to, and we need to capture it, because the danger is, you know, people, once you're in it, then when you come out of it, you won't have a moment to think of what you actually achieved at that time. So,
no, and we've talked about that before, you know, as an industry, we're incredibly bad at looking back and sort of learning and taking on the lessons from how things have changed. And I think, you know, you're right about that point about immediacy. I know that we hear from a lot of our clients about how things have changed, their requirements for how they communicate the stakeholder world that they're in. And I think those trends have really, you know, pushed through a huge amount of change, not least of which is suddenly you're not surrounded by your team in one room, you know, able to bounce around ideas. So when you think about how maybe corporate comms as an industry is evolving, are there some trends that you think are going to be, you know, here to stay, and, you know, are ones that you think, you know, have been talked about for a while but now going to be things that really define the industry going forward?
I think that you know, you'd like to think that we'll live in this wonderful new world forever, but, you know, the reality is people will get back to normal, and, you know, leaders won't have as much spare time because they're on the trains or on the planes to their meetings, so they're not as willing to communicate. But I think that they, you know, what people have said to me is that it's authenticity. It's really brought authenticity into communications. And I hope that that stays. You know, bosses have seen you don't need corporate gobbledygook to get through to your people. There's been a real two-way conversation in lots of organisations, which some companies weren't used to. So I think that's a change. And I think also what you've seen is that companies who really had a strong sense of purpose, and I know, you know, there's some people roll their eyes when you mention corporate purpose, but those who had a really strong sense of purpose behaved accordingly. And, you know, you see the companies that have made missteps along the way, and you think, you know, they don't care about their corporate purpose. They don't care about their people. So I think you hope that those things will be built upon and will be a lasting a legacy of this extraordinary time.
And obviously there have been some sectors that have had a particularly extraordinary moment. So, you know, thinking about maybe those who are in local authority or NHS press offices, even right through to some of the retail or food distribution companies that didn't really ever have to think about their brand profile before, but suddenly are on the front line. And do you think there's something in that where we've seen maybe companies who didn't have to think about reputation or purpose before go through a crisis and then now sort of have honed what that means and how they'll deploy that going forward?
I don't think when they were sort of responding to looking after their staff, I don't think they thought to themselves, we're doing this because of our reputation. They did it, you know, people always say, you know, your reputation is what people say about you when you're not in the room. And I think this was very much a case of, you know, people realise that the leaders realise, and in some cases were probably nudged along the way by their comms teams, that their staff were the most important part of their whole business, you know. And you know, you could rest the investors, you could rest the government in, you know, communications, public affairs. You had to look after your people. So I think that, sorry, I just started that and now I kind of forgot your question then, sorry. I don't think that reputation was first and foremost in their mind. I think it was just about doing the right thing for their people. And reputation is a consequence of that. And I think companies have gone up in they're standing in local communities as a result of those actions.
And I think, you know, again, if you sort of reflect on previous experience, really, you know, when we used to talk about crisis comms, you used to feel quite confident that crisis would last for a finite period of time. You know, it might be a weekend or a week or a month, but there was a moment and then you'd be able to draw a line, take a deep breath and say, right, okay, now we can wrap this up. And I think we've all gone through a moment of realising that actually COVID is actually going to be an ongoing crisis. You know, it's going to be something that we have to continually adjust and be fairly resilient to. So in many ways, the lessons we take from how we responded in the last few weeks are going to be lessons that we need to apply, I'm sure, again and repeatedly. And also, I think something I'm really struck by is it's not just about how do you behave constantly in terms of being authentic and true and transparent, but it's also about how do you build that efficiency into your team to focus people on what's really important. And, you know, the organisations that seem to be doing the best are those where I think they're also giving free rein to their teams to say, actually, I've looked at my job and here are some of the things that will make it more efficient and you just have to give me that responsibility.
I mean, that's what I've heard from some of the multinational businesses as well, is that, you know, sort of, you know, it's all very well, you know, lots of their communication in the past was very centralized, but actually now, you know, the boss in London can't tell somebody in Italy what's best for their business there, because they don't know what the external environment's like. They don't know. So I think that they've sort of given power out to communities and to local business, you know, the local parts, and so whether that will remain, I think that would be a good if it can remain, but, you know, probably it's more structured because they've just had to trust them to get on with it. But they've lived up to it. You know, there's no one who has said to me, "Oh, our staff didn't rise to the challenge." There's absolutely no one. I mean, you know, they shouldn't be surprised, but it's absolutely no one. But I also think that what's happened, you know, a few years ago, sort of the mental health agenda got more and more, you know, became more prominent in companies, and companies started talking about that more. And companies have been really careful about mental health and looking after their staff, whether they're furloughed or still working and working remotely. And that's a complete change, you know. Companies were telling me, one company told me that when their staff were all furloughed, they signed them, you know, they gave them all access to these sort of online training programs. So somebody was learning how to crochet and someone was learning just to keep them occupied. And I think all of those things, if this had happened 5 years ago, I doubt you'd have had that, really.
No, and I think you have to be sort of rather mindful of things like that, that actually, you know, the luxury of having time to crochet was possibly only if you didn't have, you know, young children at home. And I know that, you know, there obviously people have had dramatically different experiences through COVID, and I think that's another challenge for particularly our industry, because you know, demanding your team to be able to cope with sustained stress over a period of time and the complexity of what's going on for them potentially personally, I think is really, really challenging. I guess on that note, was there any skepticism or cynicism when you announced that you were going to launch CovidComms? Did you get any sort of criticism?
No, I mean, you know, there was one sort of mean tweet, but it, you know, I just slapped that down. But no, what people don't want is actually, what people were careful about was they said, "Oh, I feel like we shouldn't be celebrating, you know, like, I'm not sure if we should celebrate it if it's right." And it's kind of, but actually you've worked extraordinarily hard, and it will be kind of, you know, when it comes to the judging, we're going to have to work out how we do it, because, you know, you're probably going to have some you know, how do you say who's the best? You know, it's going to be really, really difficult in some categories, because everyone has done amazing, you know, outstanding work. And that was the only thing people were saying, "Oh, I'm not sure if I want to, you know, to be put ourselves up to be judged because it feels it's." But actually, we're still trying to get around that. But what we want to do as well is sort of going forward, take the case studies that we've learned, you know, that have been entered, and have like little show and tell sessions where people can learn what worked in one company, because there's some, you know, some things you'll never use again, because it's might, unless God forbid, you know, 100 years we'll have another pandemic. But you know, there are some lessons which will endure, and I think different companies would like to share those. You know, that's what I think everyone said. We want to get a sense of celebration and sharing what we've learned, and we're going to try and create a record of what they've done as well. You know, so yeah. But I think that's the only negative thing, was really sort of like, should we be, you know, do we want to say we were the best at it? You know, we had the best pandemic, and it's just to get the wording right there.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, we talked about this when we were sort of first kicking around the idea of the awards, and I think you're right. I mean, I think it's also come at the same time where the industry started to take a bit of a more robust view about awards, really, and think about the value of them, not only in terms of, you know, the time spent in terms of writing the nominations, but also the cost of the awards and so on and so on. And I think, you know, there is that balance increasingly about getting the right mix of recognition, but also sharing best practice. Yeah. And also, as an industry, I think holding ourselves to account a bit more and saying, do you know what, some of the things that we're trying to answer are incredibly complex. You know, one agency, one team, as brilliant as they are very unlikely to have all the answers. So the more that we can listen, share, learn, collaborate, whether that's on, you know, sharing insight into crisis comms right through to dealing with diversity, I think the more as an industry we can actually support each other to really change.
I think that's true. I mean, we were very conscious. I was very conscious that, you know, about the cost element, really. And, you know, so we sort of, you know, our normal entry fee was a certain amount of money, and we more than halved that for the entry, and each £10 from each entry will go to a charity, and you and I have been discussing which charity it might be, and we're going to announce that soon. But, you know, it was kind of also about, you know, having an event that people can come to. You know, we're going to do a proper event. We're not just going to do this standing in my kitchen reading out the winners.
Fun as that would be.
Well, not if you see the mess my kitchen is at the moment, really. But I think it's we want to put on so there's a celebration, and so if people are in an office, they can sort of like socially distance, enjoy the event. It will be short because by virtue of online events, it should be short. But you cut out all the boring bits like waiting for somebody to go up and collect a trophy and sit down at the table. All of that's gone, so it makes it, and the photographs, all of that. So we're just going to concentrate on the fun bits of an award event, really.
And I think so. It's as we've said all the way through, the principle of the CovidComms Awards are going to be about both having fun and celebrating, but also really importantly creating a record of some of the great work that's gone on. I guess that sort of neatly takes me on to talk a bit more about the categories. So could you give us maybe a bit of an overview of some of the categories that people should expect and why they're different maybe to what CorpComms would have been, the CorpComms Awards would have been last year?
I suppose, we have, it's just that they're more refined, I think, they're more defined. So we might have had, an overall engagement program, but this time, which is a catch-all phrase, but this time, we have, sort of like communicating with furloughed staff, how you communicate with furloughed staff, communicating with essential workers, and then, best internal comms sort of campaign strategy. We've got community engagement, which we don't normally look at. We've got about best health programs. So they're all very much about what people have been focused on. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to ask you about the community engagement, and again, why that's why is that sort of an area that you think has really developed through COVID?
Yeah, I think so. I think what company companies wanted to look after their staff, and their staff wanted to look after their communities. So I think that lots of people have ramped up that sort of, whether it's donating to a local food bank or I think companies were amazing, particularly at the beginning when they had to wind down their operations. It was like, what do we do with all our products? What do we do with things? How can we help? So, you saw sort of like train companies donating all their sort of soaps and things to local sort of projects and to food banks. And, you saw lots of things like that. And I think that was because their people wanted to feel like they were doing something. And you've seen lots of companies doing charitable runs and things, virtual runs. And I've just seen somebody said, are they only focused on internal comms awards?
You've oversold it, Helen.
No, they definitely aren't. But I suppose the focus was a lot on the internal comms, but we have about lots of companies have had to carry on with like capital markets, etc. Their capital markets communications, annual meetings suddenly had to be put online, and they had to look at things like that. So there's a lot of external focused categories as well, but I think there's probably a few more towards the internal.
So how many categories do you have in total?
I'm going to get it wrong. We have 24, but 5 of them are sort of 5 fun ones, which are free to enter. So, we have not all heroes wear capes, because, I think some people have done extraordinary things, and extraordinary times, and we want to recognise that. And we've got best leadership comms, which is you pay for. But then we've got best Zoom bomb, although I shouldn't say Zoom because apparently, not, but it's about, all those online conversations which have been interrupted by a cat or something. And if you've got photographic evidence, great. So, so we're trying to make it as fun as well.
And I think, again, so, really good question from Kerry. So, but I think it's worth, noting that what's interesting, I think, about the shift in terms of how you design these awards is that it's much more almost that internal comms is on a parity with external comms. And I think, again, that's really reflective of the trend that we've seen as a sector, that actually, to your point, suddenly through a crisis time, then it becomes even more important that your leadership team are communicating really effectively. And so therefore internal comms is even more important at certain moments through the calendar as external comms. And I think that balance hasn't ever been quite so sort of clear to me, and I don't think organisations have valued it in the same way. Another really good question, just thinking about, again, I was actually going to ask you whether you think the way in which the comms industry has reacted to COVID is something sort of unexpected, or whether actually you just think this is us as an industry sort of finally being given a chance to show what we're capable of, if that makes sense.
I think there is nothing better for a comms person than a crisis. Probably not one on this scale, but comms people thrive on crises, and they love crises, and it gives them a chance to demonstrate their skills in a way that the whole organisation sees it, you know, sort of. So, you know, people have said that this has given us, one comms team said to me, this has given us the ability to go into lots more meetings because people come to us now, so they've seen what we can do. So I think that it was just, you know, it's their skills are needed. It's what's around the corner. It's kind of like, how will this play out in the media? How will we do? You know, the comms people have said to me, we told our staff, you know, our bosses, you can't take government money because we don't really need it. It doesn't matter if it's cheap. You know, that will reflect on us. So I think this is comms really have become the conscience of the business. And I hope that the lasting legacy of it will, that they will be recognised as much more strategic within companies who perhaps didn't appreciate them before. So.
And I think you're right. I mean, the hope is that it sort of accelerates the trend that we've been all hammering on for ages, which is, you know, it's time that PR and comms is recognised and has a seat at the sort of C-suite decision-making table, really, and is even more important in a time when reputation changes so quickly. I guess with that in mind, are you, you know, and also that you're starting to see sort of nominations coming in, do you have a sense of whether some of the awards that you've started to develop are going to be ones that you'll carry on into the CorpComms Awards next year, do you think?
I think what this has done, though, is the whole pandemic is given me cause to think about lots of things, and about what an awards event should look like, what any event should look like, and what our business should look like. So some of them I think probably will, but, you know, I think it's almost like we want to pull things down and pull them up again and rebuild them differently. You know, somebody said to me, are you going to have a diversity and inclusion category in the CovidComms Awards? And I said no, because at that time that wasn't a priority for you know, it's an ongoing project, an ongoing program, and it's gaining more important, but it wasn't a COVID related issue. But going forward, that's the real issue we should look at for the CorpComms Awards. So I think that it's different thing, you know, it's sort of making me rethink what we should be and what our awards should look like.
And I think, I mean, I give, you know, full kudos to you, because I think it's really, really brave to have those conversations in the open and sort of say that you're prepared to totally review the format. I mean, I know there are other publications that are, you know, maybe sticking to the old formats of before, and I think it's really important that, you know, you're taking this moment to review and revamp the format. So I think we should probably jump on to some of the more detailed questions that I know everyone listening in will want answered. Can you tell us a bit about the judging process and some of the key dates that people should be aware of?
Right. Well, I admit it's going to be hard, the judging. You know, like, there's no two ways about this. And normally you ask for results and outcomes, etc. But we're saying here that actually what we're looking at really is the speed of response, the creativity, and a great narrative, and actually if you can prove the value for money or the return on investment, that's great, but that's not our priority this time. It's more about how companies responded to a specific issue for them. And I think that's so you know, we have to talk to the judges, I have to get them all together, and we've got to work it out, and you know, so we will have some online judging, and then we'll have some get-togethers, remote get-togethers, to go through things and discuss things. But yeah, it's I'm still in two minds about whether we will have gold, silver and bronze, which we might well do, or just a one-off trophy, but we have to work that out, really. And that's kind of like, I think when I talk to the judges, I think that's when we'll get more of a sense of what that will be.
And also maybe, sorry, you also, once you start seeing the nominations coming in and so on, but I think you know, it's good that you're leaving that process slightly open, you know, and being a bit more I guess qualitative, really, in terms of thinking, you know, actually it might be not appropriate to have gold, silver, bronze, but it might be that there's a commended and you know, winner and so on, and there are different ways of doing it. In terms of the deadlines, so where should people go to enter, and what are the first deadlines? Okay,
well, all the details are on www.covidcommsawards.com. Really simple. And anyone who goes on to any of my tweets will see this. It's there. It's not on our main awards, our main CorpComms site. There's a completely different site created for it, and you can enter everything online there. I think we're asking for a maximum of 500 words, so keeping it really simple. A few images, so that means we don't have to hassle you for images then, for sort of, you know, books of the night and things like that. The first deadline, the early bird deadline, is next Friday. It's a Friday week. And then there's a deadline after that, which now I'm going to get it wrong, but it's the 16th, I think, of this month.
Yeah.
And I mean, normally, you know, there's a huge penalty if you miss the early bird, and I think our penalty is about £20. So, you know, if you miss the early bird, you're not going to break the bank. And actually, probably we shouldn't have had an early bird. We should just have one deadline. But I wasn't thinking straight. I was just trying to follow normal procedures.
It's fine. Let's just leave everybody with the 16th of September as the date to aim for. But do check the website.
Yeah. Because I've played around with it. I think I played around with the deadline a few times. So that's why. Yeah.
Great. And then in terms of so get the nomination in, the judging will then happen, and then when will the awards night happen?
Well, this we spoke about just before. So it's scheduled for the 15th of October at the moment, but my likelihood is we're going to put it back. I mean, because it's an online thing, it's not, because a couple of awards programs which have been rescheduled have come onto the 15th of October, and I just feel that, you know, people have enough to do without trying to work out which one they should go to. So I'm just going to, what we don't want is anyone to feel hassled or stressed, or, you know, these are meant to be a celebration. This is not meant to be an extra hassle for people. This is meant to be people making people feel better about themselves and celebrating what they have done. So we're likely to put that back.
Okay, so expect the awards night around the end of October.
I think
it will be entirely online, but from what you've told me already, which is completely under wraps, it sounds like it's going to be a terrific evening. And I really love the idea that you've thought about how people can, you know, whether it's in small groups, in their office, but there'll be entertainment lined up so that there'll be almost live participation, even though we won't be in one single venue. And
I mean, everyone who knows me well knows I like a good awards night and a good event. And so, you know, we can't have our cheese tricycle, we can't have our balloon woman going around the tables, we can't have our sort of wandering bands going around the tables, so we're going to do something else.
Great. But I mean, the big takeaway that I hope you won't mind me sort of trying to sum up for everyone is that just the amount of work that you've gone through and thinking and consultation to make these awards as open and accessible as possible. So yeah, it's a short entry, but I think that's, as someone who's judged an awful lot of industry awards of varying standards and varying quality, I really like the idea that we're paring it right back for people to deliver a really powerful story in 500 words, because actually that's what we as communicators should be excellent at. So I think that's really valuable.
I mean, that was the feedback from all the people. Like they said, make it short. But you know, we're going to make these stories. So we're going to come back to people and say, look, you know, let's chat about your entry because we want to create a bigger story. So we're going to need a bit more detail. But this is just so people get you know, a sense of it. But you know, there's supporting documents, so you can add other things in.
And then I think what will be lovely is that, as you say, that it becomes a record, and again we'll be working with you to think about how we turn that into, you know, forums and sessions where we can hear from people who sort of come away with the award for their category. So Helen, before we finish up at 11:30 on the dot, is there anything that you would like to say to inspire people to enter if they haven't yet?
Oh, well, I don't know if I just think, you know, this is a moment in time, and if we're not careful, we'll all forget what we have done and what we have achieved in these extraordinary times. And, you know, when people get back into their new normal, which, to be honest, is just the normal, I think, you know, they won't have time to reflect. They won't have time to celebrate. And actually, you know, it's time to pat people on the back and say, you've done amazing things, and you should just be proud and hold your head up. And, you know, like, who would have thought that this was the way that 2020 was going to turn out? Definitely not me.
No, and I think, you know, again, I'm really grateful to you for you know, creating this. I think it's a really great opportunity for PR and particularly for teams who've really been sort of under the cosh for so long to get the recognition they deserve for really outstanding work. So Helen, look, thank you so much for giving us your half an hour today.
Well, thank you.
Thank you to everyone who's dialed in. We'll be sharing a recording along with some top tips from Helen on how you can enter the awards. We're really grateful to CorpComms Magazine and also to my team at Vuelio for making today happen. And look forward to seeing all the entries. It's going to be a really terrific next few months.
It's exciting. It is exciting. I do feel excited. You know, there's a lot of buzz. So.
Good.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We'll be in touch, and please do get in touch with Vuelio if you have any ideas for future webinars, or with Helen if you've got any questions around the awards itself. Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Helen. Bye.
Bye.